Northamptonshire, England, the 13th of May, 1950. 10 years earlier, this place had a different purpose. Lancaster and Wellington bombers thundered down these runways, lifting off into the dark to fight a war. It was called RAF Silverstone, a military base, concrete, wire, and grass. But on this Saturday morning, the bombers were gone. In their place came people, tens of thousands of them, arriving as early as 6 in the morning, packing the roads, spilling across the fields. They had come to witness something that had never happened before. Not a race. There had been races for 50 years. Something bigger. The very first round of a world championship. A championship that would, over the next 75 years, grow into the most watched motorsport on the planet. A king was watching. The last reigning British monarch to ever attend a motor race on home soil. This is the story of the decade that built Formula One. The champions, the machines, and the terrible price they paid to race. Chapter 1. Why a championship? To understand why 1950 mattered, you have to understand what came before it. Grand Prix racing was already old. Cars had been racing for trophies across Europe since before the First World War. Through the 1920s, the 1930s, the era of the great silver German machines and the red cars of Italy. There were famous races, the French Grand Prix, the Italian, the Monaco, but they were scattered, independent. There was no way to crown a single, definitive champion of the world. That changed after the war. Motorsport's governing body, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, the FIA, had first defined a set of rules called the International Formula back in 1946. This was the technical rulebook the cars had to obey. The premier category was Formula One, but rules for cars weren't enough. What the sport lacked was a story, a season-long battle with a beginning, a middle, and a winner. So, for 1950, the FIA announced something new. The World Championship of Drivers, 7 races, 1 champion. The best 4 results from each driver would count toward the final total. 7 rounds were scheduled, 6 of them in Europe, Britain, Monaco, Switzerland, Belgium, France, and Italy. And then, strangely, 1 race on another continent entirely, the Indianapolis 500 in the United States. It's one of the oddest quirks in F1 history. For the first 11 years, the Indy 500 officially counted toward the Formula One World Championship. Even though it ran to completely different American rules, and almost none of the European F1 drivers ever showed up to race it, and the American drivers never came to Europe. 2 separate worlds, sharing a single line in the record books. So, the stage was set. A new championship, a new decade, and a grid full of men who had survived a world war and now wanted only one thing: to go faster than anyone alive. Chapter 2. The first race, back to Silverstone. The 13th of May, a Saturday, not a Sunday as we're used to today. In 1950s Britain, Sunday was strictly a day of rest, so the race that launched a global sport was run on a Saturday afternoon instead. By the time the main event was ready, the crowd had swelled to enormous numbers. Contemporary reports put it somewhere around 150,000, with some estimates as high as 200,000. People stood 10 deep in places, pressed up against nothing more than straw bales and rope. The royal box held King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, Princess Margaret, and the Earl and Countess Mountbatten of Burma. The drivers were presented to them like soldiers before a battle. It gave the whole day a sense of occasion. This wasn't just a race, it was a coronation for a new sport. And at the front of that grid sat the cars everyone feared, the Alfa Romeos. The car was called the Alfa Romeo 158. Nicknamed the Alfetta. And here's the remarkable thing. It wasn't new. Its design dated back to 1938, before the war. It was a 1.5-liter supercharged machine, over a decade old. But it was still simply the best car in the world. Nobody had built anything to beat it. And here's a detail history never forgets. The one team that might have challenged them wasn't even there. Ferrari boycotted the first race. Enzo Ferrari felt the appearance money the organizers offered was insulting, so he kept his cars at home. It's a small moment, but it tells you everything about the man who would become the most powerful figure in the sport. Even at the very beginning, Enzo Ferrari did things his own way. Alfa Romeo had signed three of the greatest drivers of the era to drive it, and by pure coincidence, all three of their surnames began with the same two letters, Fe. The press called them the three Fs. There was Giuseppe Farina, an elegant, ice-cold Italian, known for his straight-arm driving style that every driver would later imitate. Aristocratic, ruthless, and blindingly fast. There was Luigi Fagioli, a veteran, 51 years old at this race, a hard old warrior from the pre-war era. And there was the third F, an Argentine, a quiet, barrel-chested man from a dusty farming town called Balcarce. His name was Juan Manuel Fangio. Remember that name, because this decade would come to belong to him. In qualifying on Friday, the Alfas locked out the entire front row. Farina took the very first pole position in World Championship history, with a time of 1 minute, 50.8 seconds. The fastest car that wasn't an Alfa was nearly 2 seconds slower. 21 drivers from 9 nations lined up. And when the flag dropped, Farina took the lead. The three Alfas swapped positions between themselves lap after lap, almost toying with each other, putting on a show for the king while the rest of the field simply couldn't keep up. But there was drama. Fangio, chasing hard, clipped one of the straw bales lining the circuit. It's believed the impact damaged an oil pipe. On lap 62, his engine let go and the Argentine coasted to a halt. His first World Championship race ended in retirement. That left Farina to cruise home. And behind him came one of the strangest details in Formula One history. The British driver Reg Parnell, racing on his championship debut, was circulating in third when he struck a hare at full racing speed. The animal left a genuine dent in the nose of his Alfa Romeo. Parnell simply kept going and brought the wounded car home to a podium finish. Giuseppe Farina won the first Formula One World Championship race, 2.6 seconds ahead of Fagioli, with Parnell third. Alfa Romeo, a 1, 2, 3, a perfect start. The first constructor lockout of the podium in F1 history. Farina collected the winner's prize money of £500. The average speed was just under 91 miles per hour. By today's standards, almost gentle. But on that afternoon, on a converted bomber base in front of a king, the story of Formula One had begun. Chapter 3. Farina, the First King. The 1950 season rolled on across Europe, and it was essentially an Alfa Romeo procession. The car that debuted in 1938 won every single race it entered that year. The real fight wasn't Alfa against the world. It was Alfa driver against Alfa driver, Farina against Fangio, teammate against teammate, the cold Italian against the quiet Argentine. It came down to the final race, the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. And here's what makes it dramatic. Going into that race, Farina was actually third in the standings, behind both of his Alfa Romeo teammates. Fangio led, but at Monza, Fangio's car failed him, and Farina won the race, and with it, snatched the championship out from under both men. Giuseppe Farina became the first Formula One world champion in history. At 43 years old, he had his name written into the very first line of the record books, a place no one could ever take from him. But even as Farina celebrated, everyone in the paddock could feel it. The quiet Argentine who kept finishing just behind him wasn't going to stay behind for long. The old man was coming. Chapter 4. The Rise of Fangio. Juan Manuel Fangio was not like the other drivers. Most of his rivals came from wealth and privilege. Fangio came from nothing. He was the son of Italian immigrants. His grandfather had emigrated to Argentina and clawed out a living making charcoal from tree branches. Fangio grew up in Balcarce, a frontier town, one of 6 children raised to believe in God and hard work, and he was old. By the time the World Championship began in 1950, Fangio was already 38. His rivals called him El Chueco, the bandy-legged one, and, admiringly, the old man. Most of his challengers were young enough to be his sons. But behind the wheel, age didn't matter. Fangio drove with a control that seemed almost supernatural. He was a pioneer of the four-wheel drift, sliding a car through a corner in a smoking, perfectly controlled power slide that thrilled everyone who watched. He was brutally strong, with staggering stamina, able to wrestle these heavy, brutal machines around rough tracks for 3 hours at a time. In 1951, Fangio got his revenge on Farina. Still with Alfa Romeo, he battled a fierce new rival, a young Italian in a Ferrari, all the way to the final round. And there, in Spain, Fangio took the title, his first world championship, 1951. The old man was now the king, and then everything changed. At the end of 1951, Alfa Romeo, having dominated 2 straight championships, pulled out of the sport. The rules were shifting, the costs were rising, and the Great Red Team simply walked away. Suddenly, the reigning world champion had no competitive drive, and that vacuum, the disappearance of the all-conquering Alphas, opened the door for a new force, a force wearing the same color red, but carrying a name that would become the most famous in all of motorsport: Ferrari. Yes, Chapter 5. Ascari and the Ferrari Dynasty. With Alfa Romeo gone, Scuderia Ferrari stepped into the light. And for the next 2 seasons, one man in a red car would be almost untouchable. His name was Alberto Ascari, and his story carried a shadow from the very beginning. Ascari's father, Antonio, had also been a famous Grand Prix driver in the 1920s, a star for Alfa Romeo. But when Alberto was just 7 years old, his father was killed in a crash at the 1925 French Grand Prix. He died at 36, remember that number, 36. Alberto grew up to become everything his father had been, and more. Where Fangio was all spectacular slides and brute force, Ascari was precision, careful, accurate. He almost never made a mistake. The Italian fans adored him and nicknamed him Ciccio, chubby, for his stocky build and his warm, friendly smile. For 1952 and 1953, the championship ran to smaller Formula 2 engine rules to boost the number of cars on the grid, and Ferrari had the perfect weapon, the Ferrari 500. In Ascari's hands, it was unbeatable. In 1952, Ascari won 6 of the 7 championship races he entered. He didn't just win, he dominated. He would take pole, lead every lap, set the fastest lap, and win. Total crushing control. He became Formula One's youngest champion at the time, at 34. And he kept going. Ascari won the first 3 races of 1953 as well, stretching his run to 9 consecutive championship race victories, a record for consecutive wins that would stand for decades and, in its 7 wins in a row form, is still only shared, never beaten to this day. In 1953, he took a 2nd straight title. Alberto Ascari had become Formula One's first back-to-back world champion and its first double champion. To this day, he remains Ferrari's only Italian world champion and one of only 2 back-to-back champions the team has ever had. But the story of the 1950s never stays happy for long, because as Ascari reached the summit, 2 new giants were about to enter the sport, and one of them would change everything. The Silver Arrows were coming back. Chapter 6. The Silver Arrows return. For 1954, the rules changed again. A new 2.5-liter formula. And that new formula tempted 2 of the biggest names in the automotive world to enter Grand Prix racing. One was Lancia. Ascari, after a salary dispute with Ferrari, left the team he'd conquered the world with and signed for Lancia, chasing bigger money and a bold new car. But the other newcomer was the one that mattered, Mercedes-Benz. The German giant returned to top-line racing for the first time since before the war. And they came back the way they always did, with overwhelming engineering and total professionalism. Their car was the W196, a technical marvel, run by the legendary iron-fisted team manager, Alfred Neubauer. And who did they put in the car? The best driver alive. Mercedes signed Juan Manuel Fangio. The combination was devastating. Fangio's genius plus German precision. But 1954 had a twist that makes it unique to this day. The Mercedes car wasn't ready for the start of the season, so Fangio began the year in a Maserati and won the first 2 races in it, in Argentina and Belgium. Then Mercedes arrived at the French Grand Prix. Fangio switched into the silver car and kept on winning. He ended the year champion, the only driver in F1 history ever to win a world championship, driving for 2 different teams in the same season. That was title number 2. In 1955, with Mercedes from the start, he did it again, title number 3. By 1955, Fangio had won 4 world championships, one with Alfa Romeo, and now 2 with Mercedes. He was rewriting what was possible in the sport. The old man, well into his 40s, was the undisputed master of the world. And at Mercedes, Fangio gained a teammate who would become one of the most beloved figures in the sport's history, a brilliant young Englishman named Stirling Moss. Moss would spend his career chasing Fangio, learning from him, and finishing agonizingly close to the ultimate prize. Everything was building toward a golden age, Mercedes dominant, Fangio supreme, Moss rising. The sport had never been more thrilling, and then came the darkest day in the history of motorsport. Chapter 7. Le Mans, 1955. It wasn't a Grand Prix, it was Le Mans, the great 24-hour endurance race. But the cast was the same. Mercedes were there, with Fangio and Moss. Jaguar were there, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Maserati. And the cars were faster than anything the sport had ever seen. Here was the problem. The Circuit de la Sarthe had barely changed since 1923, an era when cars struggled to reach 60 miles per hour. By 1955, the fastest cars were exceeding 170. The track had not kept up, and the pit straight, lined with packed grandstands, was dangerously narrow. Just before the disaster, 3 cars converged on that straight. Mike Hawthorne, the British Jaguar driver leading the race, spotted a late signal to pit and braked hard. His Jaguar had modern disc brakes that slowed it far quicker than the cars around it. Behind him, Lance Macklin in an Austin Healey swerved to avoid the slowing Jaguar. And behind Macklin, closing at enormous speed, came the Mercedes of Pierre Levy, a 49-year-old Frenchman in the race as a nod to the home crowd. Levy had no time to react. His car struck the back of the Austin Healey and was launched into the air, over the barrier, and into the packed spectator enclosure. The car disintegrated. Levy was killed instantly. More than 80 spectators died. Over 100 more were injured. It remains to this day the deadliest accident in the history of motorsport, and in a decision that still provokes debate 70 years later, the race was not stopped. The organizers reasoned that if the huge crowd tried to leave at once, they would block the roads and prevent ambulances from reaching the injured. So, the race went on, through the night, with the dead still lying beyond the barriers. Past midnight, Mercedes-Benz made their decision. Out of respect for the dead, they withdrew their cars from the race, even though they were leading. Fangio and Moss climbed out. Jaguar chose to continue, and Mike Hawthorne went on to win. But there was no celebration under that gray morning sky. The consequences reshaped the sport. Several countries banned motor racing outright in the immediate aftermath. France, Germany, Spain, Switzerland. Switzerland's ban on circuit racing would endure for decades. And at the end of the season, having won that year's sports car championship, Mercedes-Benz withdrew from all motor racing entirely. They would not return to Formula One for over 30 years. The silver arrows were gone. Fangio, once again, needed a new home, and the sport was forced, for the first time, to truly confront the price it was paying. Chapter 8. The Price of Speed. Death was not an exception in this era. It was woven into the fabric of the sport. Rewind just a few weeks before Le Mans, to the Monaco Grand Prix in late May. Alberto Ascari, the 2-time champion, the precise, careful master, lost control of his Lancia at the harbor chicane. The car flew off the track and plunged into the Mediterranean Sea. For a terrible moment, there was nothing but bubbles and an oil slick on the water. And then, his light blue helmet bobbed to the surface. Ascari was alive. Divers pulled him from the water, with nothing worse than a broken nose and shock. A miraculous escape. 4 days later, Ascari went to Monza to watch a friend test the car. On a whim, he asked to do a few laps himself, just to make sure the crash hadn't shaken his nerve. He wasn't dressed to race. He'd left his lucky blue helmet at home, a helmet he was so superstitious about that he never let anyone else touch it. He borrowed a white one instead. On the 3rd lap, at a fast corner, the Ferrari inexplicably slid and crashed. Alberto Ascari was killed. He was 36 years old, the exact same age as his father when he died. Both men had won 13 championship Grand Prix. Both were killed 4 days after surviving a serious accident. A tragic, eerie symmetry across 2 generations. The corner where he died at Monza is named after him to this day, the Variante Ascari. This was the reality these men lived with. Over the course of Fangio's career, more than 30 of his fellow drivers were killed. No seatbelts, leather helmets, straw bales instead of barriers. They raced knowing that any weekend could be their last, and they climbed into the cars anyway. That was the price of speed in the 1950s, and somehow they kept racing. Chapter 9. The Old Man's Last Stand. After Mercedes withdrew, Fangio moved to Ferrari for 1956, and won again. Title number 4. Then, in 1957, he returned to Maserati, driving the beautiful 250F, and produced perhaps the greatest single drive the sport has ever seen, the 1957 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Fangio needed the win to seal his 5th title, but a disastrous fumbled pit stop dropped him nearly 50 seconds behind the 2 leading Ferraris of Mike Hawthorne and Peter Collins. 50 seconds, on a lap that took over 9 minutes. It looked impossible, and then the 46-year-old old man did something extraordinary. Lap after lap, he shattered the lap record, again and again and again. On one lap, he was 11 seconds faster than the Ferraris. He reeled them in like they were standing still, and with barely a lap to go, he swept past both of them to take the win, his 5th world championship. It was his final victory. Fangio later admitted he had frightened even himself that day, that he had driven in a way he never would again. He retired in 1958, weary and saddened by the deaths of so many friends. 5 world championships, a record that would stand for 46 years until a man named Michael Schumacher finally beat it in 2003. He had won titles with 4 different teams, a feat no driver has ever repeated. The greatest of the founding era, the old man, Juan Manuel Fangio. Chapter 10. The End of an Era. As the decade closed, the sport was transforming. In 1958, a new champion was crowned, Mike Hawthorne, the bow-tie-wearing Englishman, who became the first ever British world champion. He beat his friend Stirling Moss to the title by a single agonizing point, despite Moss winning 4 races that year to Hawthorne's 1. And the way Hawthorne won speaks to the character of the age. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Hawthorne faced disqualification for a rules infringement. It was Stirling Moss, his own title rival, who stepped in and testified to the officials on Hawthorne's behalf, getting the penalty overturned. That gesture handed points to the man he was fighting for the championship. Moss lost the title by 1 point. He never regretted it. That was the code these men lived by. Hawthorne retired immediately after winning, heartbroken by the death of his close friend and teammate Peter Collins earlier that season. Tragically, just months later, in January 1959, Hawthorne was killed in a road accident in his Jaguar. He was 29, but 1958 marked another, quieter revolution. That year, the FIA introduced a brand new prize, the Constructors' Championship, to honor the teams, not just the drivers. And the first team ever to win, it wasn't Italian, it was British. Vanwall, the green cars built by Tony Vandervelde for the express purpose of beating the Italians. He did exactly that. And there was one more sign of the future. Early in 1958, a small, nimble car won a Grand Prix, a Cooper with a crucial difference. Its engine was mounted behind the driver, not in front. It was the first World Championship win for a rear-engine car of the modern era. It looked like a curiosity. It was, in fact, the blueprint for every Formula One car that would ever follow. Within a couple of years, the front-engined cars, the beautiful red machines that had defined the entire decade, would be obsolete. British engineering and the rear-engine revolution was about to take over the sport completely. The 1950s built Formula One. It gave the sport its first champion in Farina, its first dynasty in Ascari and Ferrari, its first true legend in Fangio. It gave it triumph, and it gave it unbearable tragedy. It laid down the rivalries, the teams, the circuits, and the code of honor that still echo through the sport today. Every roaring engine you hear today, every world champion crowned, every checkered flag, it all traces back to a converted bomber base in England on a Saturday in May 1950, when a king watched and the story began. This has been the story of Formula One, the groundbreaking 1950s. If you enjoyed this journey back to where it all began, subscribe, because we're telling the entire story of Formula One decade by decade. Next time, the 1960s. The rear-engine revolution takes over, a new generation of legends arrives, and the sport pushes speed to terrifying new heights. Thanks for watching.